The sirens were screaming. Blue and red lights flashed across the street. A small crowd gathered outside the quiet suburban neighborhood. On the ground, a man in his late 40s was barely breathing. His son knelt beside him, panic in his eyes. And right there, holding his father's hand, was the very girl he had been told never to speak to. Her face was covered in tears. She was whispering, "Stay with me. Please stay with me." It was the moment that would shatter years of prejudice and change everything. But to understand how they got here, we need to go back. 3 years ago, in a quiet town in Texas, 14-year-old Ethan lived with his father, Mark, in a 2-story house with a neat little yard. Life was simple. Ethan went to school, played basketball, and hung out with his dad. One sunny Saturday, a moving truck pulled up to the house next door. Out stepped a black woman in her late 30s, holding the hand of a teenage girl. The girl had curly hair, warm brown eyes, and a shy smile. Her name was Aaliyah. Mark stood at the window, watching them unload boxes. His face hardened. When Ethan asked, "Should I go say hi?" Mark's voice was cold. "No, stay away from them." Ethan frowned. "Why?" Mark's eyes didn't leave the window. "People like them. They're trouble. You keep to yourself, you hear me?" It wasn't the first time Mark had made comments like that. Ethan didn't fully understand, but he obeyed. Weeks passed. Aaliyah and her mom tried to be friendly, waving whenever they saw Ethan or Mark. But Mark would turn his back. Ethan felt uncomfortable. He didn't know Aaliyah, but something about avoiding her felt wrong. At school, they ended up in the same science class. Aaliyah sat 2 rows behind him. She was smart, funny, and always helping other students. One day, she asked him during lunch, "Why don't you ever talk to me?" Ethan hesitated. "My dad, he just doesn't want me to." Her smile faded, but she nodded slowly. "Okay, I get it." But in her eyes, there was hurt. One rainy afternoon, Ethan was walking home when he saw Aaliyah struggling with her bike chain. He almost walked past. His father's warning echoed in his mind. But she looked up at him with a frustrated laugh and said, "You know how to fix this?" Before he could stop himself, Ethan knelt down and helped her. They talked for a few minutes about school, about music, about how she hated math. It felt normal. But when he got home, Mark noticed his wet shoes and asked where he'd been. When Ethan admitted he'd talked to Aaliyah, Mark slammed his fist on the table. "I told you not to get involved with them." Ethan's chest tightened. "Why? She's nice. She's just..." End of discussion. Mark shouted, storming off. Months later, life carried on. Ethan and Aaliyah exchanged small hellos at school, careful not to be seen talking too much. Then came that night. It was just after 8 p.m. Mark was fixing something in the garage when Ethan heard a loud crash. He ran outside and saw his father on the floor, his face pale, his body shaking. "Dad! Dad!" Ethan yelled, but Mark's breathing was shallow. He was having a heart attack. Ethan's hands trembled. He didn't know what to do. His phone had died earlier, and panic froze his mind. Then he heard a voice behind him. "Ethan, what happened?" It was Aaliyah. She'd been taking the trash out when she saw Ethan screaming. Without hesitation, she rushed over, pulled out her phone, and called 911. Aaliyah knelt beside Mark, checking his pulse like she'd been trained to. "Ethan, we have to keep him breathing. Help me." Ethan was crying now. "I don't know what to do. Just follow my lead," she said firmly. She started chest compressions, counting out loud. Her voice was steady, even though her hands were shaking. Neighbors began to gather, some calling out in shock. But Aaliyah didn't stop. By the time the ambulance arrived, she had kept Mark's heart beating. Hours later, Mark was in a hospital bed, alive but weak. Ethan sat in the waiting room, his mind replaying everything. He remembered his father's words, "Stay away from them." And yet, if Aaliyah had stayed away, Mark would be dead. When Mark woke, the doctor explained how quick thinking had saved his life. "Your neighbor's daughter acted fast. You're lucky she was there." Mark turned his head and saw Aaliyah and her mom standing in the doorway. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then his voice cracked. "Thank you." It was the first time he had spoken to them. Mark came home a week later. Something had changed. One morning, he called Ethan into the living room. "Invite Aaliyah and her mom over for dinner." Ethan blinked. "Really? It's the least we can do," Mark said quietly. That dinner was awkward at first. Mark fumbling with small talk, Aaliyah's mom keeping polite smiles. But by the end of the night, they were laughing over a card game. From then on, Mark waved whenever he saw them. He even started chatting with Aaliyah's mom over the fence. Ethan and Aaliyah became real friends, no more hiding. They studied together, played basketball at the park, and shared secrets. One evening, Mark pulled Ethan aside. His voice was heavy. "I was wrong. I'll let ignorance get in the way of seeing good people for who they are. Don't make the same mistake I did." Ethan nodded, his eyes stinging with emotion. Years later, when Ethan graduated high school, Aaliyah and her mom were in the front row cheering. And Mark? He stood beside them, his arm around Aaliyah's mom like old friends. Because sometimes the people we are told to avoid are the very ones who will save our lives.